What you're about to hear is a first-person confession, inspired by the real experiment, or perhaps the legend, of the Soviet two-headed dog. Just one voice from inside the lab, telling what should never be known. They told me it was impossible, grotesque, unnatural, even dangerous, but that only made me want it more. In a world where boundaries are drawn by fear, I chose to step over them, not for glory, not for country, for knowledge. For the question that gnawed at the edges of reason: what if life could be rearranged like parts of a machine? They gave me clearance, funding, and silence. In return, I gave them progress. I stitched flesh onto flesh, breath into breath. And on that cold metal table, something opened its eyes. Two heads, one heartbeat, and a presence that made the air feel heavy. I thought I was the creator, but in those first seconds I realized I was only the witness. And as you listen now, perhaps you will be too. The letter arrived with no fanfare. A simple envelope slid beneath my door in the dead of night. The Soviet crest stamped in red wax needed no explanation. I knew what it meant. I had been chosen. At dawn, I boarded a black vehicle with curtains drawn. No words were spoken. The roads blurred beneath us, endless stretches of frozen ground and leafless trees bending under the weight of silence. We drove for hours until the landscape became a blur of grey and white, and then we stopped before a facility that reeked of secrecy. Concrete walls taller than reason, gates that groaned as if reluctant to open. Inside, I was led down corridors where fluorescent lights flickered like dying stars. In a steel room, 3 men waited. They wore medals that gleamed, but their eyes were colder than the walls around us. "You are here because you understand the cost of progress," one began, his voice as sharp as the scalpel I would soon wield. A folder slid across the table. Diagrams, medical charts, and pages stamped classified. At the center, an illustration of a dog with 2 heads, fused along muscle and artery, sustained by a single, powerful heart. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is not fantasy. It is necessity. We are entering an age where the line between life and death, soldier and machine, must blur." I read each word, felt my pulse quicken. The military dreamed of creatures that could survive conditions no soldier could. Creatures that could be patched, reassembled, made stronger. Failures were acceptable. Success would be worshipped. One man leaned closer. His breath was cold vodka and old tobacco. "You will make this happen." There was no question, only command. As they spoke of logistics, facilities, subjects, supplies, my mind wandered. Questions should have risen. What of pain? What of suffering? But all I felt was fire. My heart pounded against my ribs, an answer to their challenge. That night, alone in a sparse barracks room, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as snow fell outside in slow, soundless patterns. I imagined it. Sinew connecting sinew, arteries pulsing with shared blood, 2 minds forced to coexist in a single body. The question gnawed at me: if one heart could beat for 2 minds, what else could we control? The operating room felt colder than the Siberian night. Steel tables polished to a mirror's edge reflected not light, but dread. Ancient equipment surrounded me, relics of war repurposed for something far stranger. Rusted clamps, bone saws with dulled edges sharpened anew, jars filled with antiseptic that stung the nose and burned the eyes. The scent of chemicals mixed with sweat, forming a cocktail of anxiety and anticipation. They delivered the subjects at dusk. The first, a large shepherd, fur matted but eyes clear, strong, defiant. He fought the restraints, teeth bared until the sedative dulled his world. The second, smaller, lighter, trembling as he was carried in. He did not resist. His eyes held something else. Resignation. They had been chosen for resilience, and I had been chosen for willingness. The procedures began. Scalpel to flesh, veins opened, arteries clamped and redirected. Hours stretched into eternity. The heart of the larger dog was exposed, its steady rhythm both reassuring and mocking. I whispered apologies neither would hear and continued. Connecting the second head was not just science, it was defiance. Blood vessels, nerves, tissue, everything had to align perfectly or fail spectacularly. The room filled with the sound of my breathing, heavy and uneven, as my hands moved with mechanical precision. The first attempt faltered. Clamps slipped, blood sprayed in delicate arcs across sterile gowns. The heart sputtered and gave up its fight. We removed the bodies in silence, but failure only sharpened my resolve. The second attempt consumed the night. My assistants no longer questioned, only obeyed. The air thickened with exhaustion and fear. I ignored them. My world had narrowed to tendons and tissue, stitches and silence, and then a tremor. The larger dog's chest rose with a shallow breath. The smaller head's eyelids fluttered. I froze, scalpel still in hand, unable to believe. But the creature's nostrils flared. One tongue flicked out, testing the sterile air. It blinked, it breathed. My knees nearly gave way. I pressed a trembling hand against the table to steady myself. A sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a growl, vibrated in the creature's throat. Both heads moved, disconnected yet bound, blinking out of sync but alive. I had made life defy its own design. In that moment, triumph surged through me, and with it, a cold shadow. This was not birth, this was invasion. Nature had been coerced, twisted into something unnatural, and it had obeyed. But for how long? The first hours were filled with silence and shallow breaths. The creature lay motionless, each head twitching sporadically, uncertain of its place in the world I had forced it into. I watched through the observation window, heart pounding, pulse matching the erratic rise and fall of two fragile chests. Movement came slowly, the larger head lifted first, tongue lolling out, eyes glazed but aware. It attempted to rise, only to be yanked down by the weight of the second head, which jerked in the opposite direction, pulling at the stitched flesh with a sickening tug. They growled at each other, low, uncertain sounds that spoke of confusion and pain. The larger head bared its teeth, the smaller head snarled back weakly, both pulling, both resisting. Their struggle was silent war played out in tensioned muscle and frayed nerves. I should have felt pity, but I only felt fascination. Over the next 2 days, the creature's defiance grew. The larger head attempted dominance, snapping at the smaller, which responded with frantic jerks and twisting movements that made the entire body convulse. They couldn't coordinate. They fought against each other and against themselves. Sleep became impossible. The creature did not rest, and neither did I. My cot sat unused in the corner of the observation room. I stared at monitors, at flickering images of twisted flesh, at 2 sets of eyes that seemed to grow more aware by the hour. Small anomalies began to surface. The overhead lights flickered sporadically, even after maintenance swore the wiring was sound. The recorded audio developed odd distortions. Faint whispers layered beneath mechanical hums, too soft to pass yet persistent enough to unsettle. I chalked it up to fatigue. But when I rewound the tapes, the static seemed to form patterns, rhythmic pulses that didn't match any known interference. The aggression escalated. The larger head lashed out, biting at the smaller, tearing stitches that we scrambled to repair. Sedation slowed them, but only for moments. As soon as the drugs wore off, the war resumed. Late on the 3rd night, I leaned forward, forehead pressed against the cold glass. Both heads turned toward me simultaneously. Their eyes met mine with unsettling focus, as though they had finally found a common enemy. The lights dimmed, the recordings crackled with distorted echoes of growls and something else beneath. Something like laughter. Did I stitch flesh? Or open a door? By the fifth day, something shifted. The growling and jerking that once defined their struggle began to soften into something far more disturbing. Harmony. The two heads no longer fought against one another. They moved together in slow, deliberate coordination, as though they had finally reached an understanding, but the understanding felt wrong. Not cooperation born from survival, but from something far colder, more deliberate. The larger head, once dominant and aggressive, stopped eating. Food was placed before it, but it would only nudge the bowl toward the smaller head. The smaller head devoured every scrap, its eyes never leaving mine through the observation window. It chewed slowly, methodically, like it understood the significance of the moment better than I did. At night, I heard faint sounds from the observation room speakers, soft, wet noises that I told myself were just the creature's restless movements. But when I listened closer, I swore I heard whispers. No language I recognized, only a sibilant murmuring that coiled in my ears and lingered long after I muted the feed. I stopped sleeping entirely. The creature never did. Hours bled into each other, each minute heavier than the last. I stared at the monitors until my vision blurred, and when I blinked, I could swear the creature's heads had shifted position, watching me directly, even when the cameras were angled away. The nightmares came anyway. I dreamed of corridors that stretched forever, with paw prints appearing ahead of me in the dust. I followed them blindly, only to find them leading to steel doors sealed tight. From the other side came scraping and then a whisper. "We're waiting." Waking brought no relief. My reflection in the observation glass looked back at me with suspicion. Papers on my desk rearranged themselves when I looked away. Pens rolled off the table without reason. The temperature in the room dropped without warning, my breath visible in clouds that vanished too quickly. The dog no longer behaved like any creature I had studied. It watched me, not with curiosity, but with intent. Both heads would turn in perfect unison, their eyes meeting mine, unblinking and cold. One evening, as I leaned over the observation console, I heard a faint scuffling behind me. I turned, expecting one of my exhausted assistants. The hallway was empty, but the air smelled faintly of damp fur and antiseptic. The smaller head began to move its mouth silently, as though reciting something to itself. I couldn't hear it through the speakers, but I felt it in my bones. My notes became erratic, scribbles of half-formed thoughts. My handwriting no longer resembled my own. Words I didn't remember writing filled the margins. Not masters, witnesses. Objects shifted positions. A wrench that should have been on the operating tray appeared on the floor. Footprints, faint muddy outlines, led from the surgical room to the observation chamber and vanished. My colleagues stopped questioning my long hours and drawn face. They avoided my gaze altogether. The line between observation and participation blurred. The creature seemed to sense it, its heads cocking slightly to the side whenever I approached the glass, as if inviting me to step closer. And I did. I pressed my palm against the cold barrier. Both heads mirrored the motion, pressing against the other side, their breath fogging the glass in patterns that resembled fingerprints. I thought I was the master. I had become the apprentice. The storm raged outside, rain pelting the windows like 1,000 tiny hammers, wind howling through the cracks in the aging facility. Inside, the air was thick with tension, even thicker than the usual stifling silence that haunted the corridors. On day 15, something inside the creature snapped. It began with a low, almost imperceptible growl that reverberated through the walls. The lights flickered in warning, casting eerie shadows that twisted and stretched unnaturally across the room. I was at my desk when I first heard it, a sharp clang followed by a thud, then the unmistakable sound of metal snapping under pressure. The creature had broken its restraints. I rushed to the observation window, heart thundering in my chest, but before I could react, the first crash came. A metal table, overturned with a force I couldn't fathom, slid across the floor as if propelled by an unseen hand. The monitors blared with static, and I saw it. The creature, thrashing against the steel walls, the two heads jerking violently in different directions, trying to escape the bonds that held it down. The staff, frozen in fear, scattered in all directions. One screamed, another tried to flee, but there was no way out. The creature wasn't attacking them. It wasn't interested in anything but breaking free. The larger head pulled at the chains, snapping them like brittle twigs, while the smaller head seemed to direct its movements with eerie precision. The room was chaos. Syringes flew, equipment shattered, and glass vials rolled across the floor, their contents spilling out in pools of bright, unnatural color. Yet the creature didn't engage with the panic around it. It only observed, calm, calculated. It was only then that I understood the true nature of what I had created. The creature didn't need to attack. It knew how to control the fear of those who were meant to control it. The storm outside intensified, the winds howling so loudly that they drowned out the sound of footsteps as we gathered ourselves. The creature, no longer restrained, slowly made its way toward the door, its heads moving in sync now, an unsettling sense of unity between them. They didn't run, they didn't lash out. They simply walked, calmly and purposefully. It broke free into the lower corridors of the facility, disappearing into the darkness where the flickering lights could no longer follow. The staff scrambled to respond, but by the time anyone had gathered their bearings, the creature was gone. No cries, no attacks, just the haunting silence of the lower halls. The emergency lights flickered, casting distorted shadows down the long, sterile corridors. I led the search, my heart a mixture of fear and anticipation. The air was thick, colder now, as if the very building had sensed what had been unleashed. We moved in tight groups, weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through the darkness, but there were no signs of struggle. No blood, no tracks of any kind, except for the faintest outline of paw prints that appeared suddenly on the polished floor, only to vanish as quickly as they had formed. I thought I saw it, in the shadows, in the corners of the hallways. But whenever I turned the corner, it was gone. A whisper of movement, like something just out of reach. The creature was toying with us. We couldn't find it, not in the lower levels, not in the ventilation shafts, not in any of the rooms where it could have hidden. I stood there, at the edge of the darkened corridor, breathing heavily, and realized something that made my blood run cold. I had created something that understood fear, not felt it. It was playing with us. The facility was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that clung to the walls and felt like it was pressing down on your chest. The storm outside had long passed, leaving behind a thick, damp air that seemed to carry whispers. I had been searching the lower levels for hours, but the creature was nowhere to be found. As I stood in the darkened lab, the chill of the room wrapping itself around me, something told me I was not alone. I turned slowly, scanning the room with the dim light from my flashlight. My heart raced, but my body refused to acknowledge the rising panic. I had created this. I had to face it. The lab was deserted, except for the sterile tables and broken equipment scattered across the floor, and then I saw it. In the far corner, near the operating table, the creature sat motionless, its two heads turned toward me, both eyes fixed on mine, cold and calculating. It was still, too still. Neither head moved, neither blinked. I could feel the weight of its gaze, the intense pressure like it was peeling back the layers of my thoughts, prying into my very soul. My pulse quickened. The silence stretched, unbearable. Every breath felt like it was choking me. I stood frozen, too afraid to move, but too curious to look away. And then, without moving its lips, one head spoke. Or perhaps it spoke within my mind. You made me. Now I make you. The words were not heard. They were felt, deep within my mind, like an alien whisper that slithered through my thoughts. I staggered back, my chest tightening, my breath coming in short gasps. The room felt smaller, the walls seeming to close in on me. The cold that had gripped my body deepened, and I could swear the air had turned to ice. I couldn't breathe. The creature didn't move, didn't shift. It simply sat there, staring, its dual gaze locking me in place. The words echoed, reverberating through my mind, cutting through my thoughts like a blade. You made me. Now, I make you. The tension in the air thickened, every second feeling like an eternity. I was paralyzed, unsure whether I was trapped in a nightmare or if this was real. The creature's heads slowly tilted in opposite directions, as if contemplating my very existence, assessing me like a specimen under a microscope. The longer I stood there, the more I began to lose my sense of time, my grip on reality slipping through my fingers. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it stood up. Both heads turned in sync, not with urgency, but with cold precision, as if it were deciding where to go next. It walked away from me, moving with unnerving grace for a creature so grotesque. Every step was calculated, deliberate, as though it knew the fear it had instilled in me, savoring each moment of my helplessness. The lights flickered above me, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls, and with that final movement, the creature slipped into the darkness of the lab's farthest corner, disappearing like smoke. The silence returned, but it was a silence that felt heavier than before. The air was thick with dread. I could still feel the weight of its presence, lingering in the corners of my mind. Something was there. Something was watching. I stood motionless, unable to move, unable to shake the sensation that the creature was no longer confined to that room. It had left, yes, but it had left something behind. I wasn't alone anymore. The creature had become part of me, and now it was everywhere. I write this confession from a place I can barely recognize anymore. The walls are too close, the air too still, and the silence too loud. The facility is deserted, empty save for the memories that haunt its corridors. I am alone, or at least that's what I try to convince myself every time the footsteps echo down the hall. They are not my own. At night, when I close my eyes, I hear them. Slow, deliberate steps that seem to come from behind the walls. The whispers return, curling through the cracks in my thoughts like smoke. I've heard them in every corner, every dark space of this place. They never stop. The creature is still with me. I know it. I feel its presence everywhere. It haunts the very air I breathe, the spaces I walk. When I think I am alone, I can sense its eyes on me, staring, calculating. It knows my every thought before I even have it. I thought I was the creator. I thought I could control it. But I see now that I was the one being watched, being guided, manipulated. It never needed to obey me. It never needed to fear me. It had learned something I hadn't: how to survive, how to exist beyond the realm of what I could control. And now, as I sit here hidden from the world that once offered me purpose, I hear them. I hear them in the dead of night, not in the hallways or in the corners of my mind, but behind my eyes. It never left. The creature's presence is inside me, an infection I cannot escape. It has become part of me, a reflection of my own twisted creation. And I wonder, every time I think I am alone, every time I look into the darkness, is it still watching? And if you're reading this, perhaps it found you too.